as from an art buyer perspective, lets them know that you kind of can do a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. So I think it just expands your skill set and what you can offer.
Hi everyone, my name is Claire Makes Things, and today we're talking to Cody, who is a surface pattern designer, and we're going to talk about combining traditional and digital media. And she's got some excellent tips on how to combine traditional media with digital and how to use that for your portfolio. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Hello, Cody.
Hi.
How are you? Could you please introduce yourself?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm an illustrator and surface pattern designer. I started out in graphic design and I worked in-house for about 13 years as a graphic designer and illustrator. So I've done a lot of different projects from logos, magazine, articles, patterns for wallpaper. And about the last 4 or 5 years that I worked in-house, I was an art buyer, and that's how I discovered surface pattern design. We attended Surtex, an art licensing show, and I just saw that whole world, and I just knew that as soon as I saw it and started working with all the other surface pattern designers from the buyer side, that's what I wanted to do. So for the last 4 years, I have been self-employed, working my own, building up my portfolio and licensing them to companies and manufacturers, and it's been a lot of fun.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously a big fan of your work, and we talked before about how you use traditional media, which is super interesting. So my first question to you is, how did you start your passion for mixed media and combining traditional media in your work?
Well, it kind of started, I think, really with school. I'd always experimented with different types of mediums, and my college program was a dual program, graphic design and illustration, and especially on the illustration side, they really taught you all the different mediums. I remember illustration especially, they went through that each project was a different medium you had to complete the project in. So they really were pushing you to learn all the traditional side of that. And then as a graphic designer, you had to learn all the different softwares. And so you would take your illustrations and combine them often into the projects that you're working for on the design side. One of my projects was a three-dimensional illustration project, and that I think really further opened up just all the possibilities of how to combine traditional mediums with digital mediums. And so I have some examples here. This is actually one of my first major inspirations was Red News Studio by Chris Sickles. He basically creates these little worlds, basically like scenes, and then he photographs them. So he works a lot in editorial illustration. So you can see on the left side is his three-dimensional work that he created. So he made those, I think he calls them puppets, and then the whole scene that sets it all up, and then he photographs it. And so on the right is showing what it looks like in the editorial, I think the book cover. Yeah. This is actually my first three-dimensional illustration that I did as my college assignment. So we were each given a little nursery rhyme to illustrate. And so I decided to use my kitten I had at the time with a little mouse that I sculpted. And I actually have my mouse right here.
Yeah, so sweet.
So he's just sculpted out of polymer clay, and this is actual. I had to give up my tweezers forever, buy new ones.
And the lettering in this as well, did you add that later, or how did you do that?
Yeah, I actually, my original was way cleaner, and I got feedback that it just didn't really match very well. And so I just really, it's scribbles that I ended up just doing on a sheet of paper. I scanned in and then colored in Photoshop.
That's really nice. I love this result. It's really nice to see.
So this is what some three-dimensional works that I did later on, because ever since an assignment, I just love three-dimensional illustration. You also don't see it a lot. It doesn't seem like other places, at least I haven't seen it a whole lot. These are my ballerinas dancing on clouds. They're little vintage ballerinas from the jewelry boxes that you'll see as little kids have. The clouds are made out of cotton balls, and I used they're scrapbooking powders, different colored powders that I put on to make the coloring on the clouds. And then the background is just acrylic paint on canvas. And then I have my robot that I made. He's made out of boiler parts. We have an old boiler. And
That's awesome.
a lot of the little plants stuff or stuff like found pressed flowers and like the butterfly's real, the nest is real. And then I have my little house on clouds. And this is the first piece from college, and the house on clouds is actually probably the most similar to Red Nose Studio. And it's like they're a little bit different way of working, whereas the ballerinas and the robot are more like the fine art where you can actually get the piece and hang it on your wall. Like, whereas these are more like you make the scene, you take the photograph, and it's a print. And I actually have the little house too.
It's so cute. Yeah, that definitely feels a bit more like illustration, right? Like children's books illustrations as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So what for you, like what have you found? Because you still use traditional media and like arts and crafts techniques in your digital work as well, right? Like what have you found that the benefits are? And what do you think the benefits are in general for artists?
Well, you're continually learning and exploring new media. So you're continually expanding your skills. And I think it just keeps your work fresh and relevant. I mean, even as if you're just primarily a digital artist, there's always new software coming out. There's always new updates coming out that you're, having to make yourself familiar with. It's kind of like in the creative industry, you're always kind of having to keep on top of that stuff so that you stay on top of things for the market and everything, ways of working. So by continuing learning all these things, it's just another way of expanding that skill set. And by continuing to do this, you're always like discovering strengths of the medium and what they can bring to your art over time, and then enhancing your artistic expression. And then the process of combining these techniques, you'll develop your own unique ways of working that are distinctly yours. And I think that's what's really going to set you apart over time, that you'll pick up certain ways of working that become yours over time, really, in your own way. And then, artists are like throughout history have always been known for pushing the boundaries and experimenting. So just kind of keeps you in that artist's way of working and covering new artistic possibilities and expanding your creativity.
It's also a bit about like finding creative ways to use certain mediums, right? Or turning something that wasn't traditionally a technique, but that you can use as a technique, right? I'm thinking, for example, of lettering artists that use food, like exclusively food, to turn that then into lettering and then make photographs of that. I like love that stuff. And I like that there's actually like a limitation to what you can do. And then trying to push those boundaries as an artist, that it's part of your creative process, right? And I also think that people respond really well to that because they can connect with that a bit more. I don't know if you found this is just what I was thinking of, that a lot of digital media, people don't really understand, like they think it's beautiful, but they can't really connect to it if it's just all digital and really, really clean. But when it is stuff that has layers of like natural textures, or for example the food or sculptures or arts and crafts, people understand it, and maybe reminds them of their own creativity, like things that they used to experiment with as a child, for example.
I mean, I think you're never really bored, because it's also a way to continually push the boundaries of whatever you're really passionate about, like with the food, for example. And I mean, there's so many different ways you can really take it, and then it can be used. So yeah, you'll never be bored.
Yeah. And what have you found that for your work that you showcase in your portfolio that has traditional media in it, what have you found are the benefits? Like how have people responded to that?
I noticed a lot when I exhibited at Surtex for the first time this past May, and I noticed that I got a lot of great feedback on my collage pieces in my portfolio. And it was a combination of collage work with some digital elements that I did in Procreate on top. So I got a lot of really positive feedback from that. And even there was a few students who came by and they were asking how I did certain stuff on certain pieces. And I was realizing as I was going through that there's really different ways that I created each piece when I started explaining it. So I think it just also, like, as from an art buyer perspective, lets them know that you kind of can do a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. So I think it just expands your skill set and what you can offer.
Yeah, like really show that you can get really creative with different materials, right? So if they have a brief where it says you need to use this specific thing because that's part of their brand, then you can show that you can turn that into something beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And what are some tools that you use a lot, and what would you recommend that other people look at as well?
I love the pencil. I love the whole sketchbook process in the beginning. I often love my sketch better than the final piece. And I've even gotten feedback in the past from like in college, like during critique groups, they would look at my sketch and they would like it better than they liked the final piece or something from the sketch. And then I would go back and I would bring that back into the final piece. And so pencil is just my ultimate favorite that I love. And I think I haven't really heard of really many who don't start with a sketch. So I think that's kind of mostly a universal thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I love acrylic paint. I love the marks that it gives, especially if you're making like solid background, that little brush mark that it brings. Colored pencils, because it's very similar to a pencil, but it gives you texture, but especially watercolor pencils, because you can also bring areas into it that are wet, but leave like the texture part of the colored pencil part if you want to leave it dry.
Yeah.
And then with the wax pastels, there are like the acrylic ones that you can also, do the same thing as you do with the watercolor pencils.
Mm-hmm.
I love charcoal and the charcoal pencils if you don't want to get your hands dirty. And I think it really just depends like what resonates with you over time as you look at these materials. Just pick one out and see what, really kind of interests you. And then over time, you'll kind of see what you prefer it for the type of marks that you're getting. And then for like on the digital side, I used to use a scanner a lot, but now I primarily use my phone. I'll just find a bright spot in the house or by the window and I take a picture of it. And then oftentimes I'll take it into Procreate and refine or do detail work. And then from there, it's like a lot of times either back and forth from Illustrator to Photoshop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to say that the watercolor pencils, they're my favorite as well. Just a really nice texture to use with that. And I'm thinking of pen and ink as well. That's something, I don't use a lot, but for example, Quentin Blake, the illustrator who used to do the illustration for the Roald Dahl books, he exclusively uses pen and ink by hand. And that's something that you cannot really recreate digitally, like the messiness of it and like the expressions in those lines. It's really quite unique, and just sticking or limiting yourself to just doing that by hand and then obviously later scanning it in and editing with Photoshop a bit, it makes it so expressive and so unique.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I completely agree. And there's some materials that you'll find that give that expressiveness that you can't really get in digital or as easily.
Yeah. But I found, for example, with Procreate, right? That's what I use mostly, that all the textures that you can use in the brushes, when you make those brushes, everything starts with natural elements, right? You use a charcoal background or like leaves or wood or whatever, and that then turns into a brush or a texture. It all starts with that. So these softwares, these programs, they also allow you to really easily combine traditional elements or traditional media with the software, which is really good. And I don't think people take advantage of that. And it's really easy to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially Procreate with all their brushes that a lot of them they mimic traditional medium. And I do that often. I'll like combine it even with the traditional stuff that I pull in. And then I'll use like more of a traditional media brush that you'll see in some later examples I show. That's just made from a brush in Procreate, but it's supposed to be meant to look like a canvas or like a chalky type of look to it. So it's really great to combine all of them. I just love the looks that you can get from different ways of using them all.
Yeah. And you have a couple of examples to show us, right? And where you can see the use of textures and like combining these different techniques.
Yeah, so this is an example of the start of like the assignment was to create photo card designs. So these were holiday
Hmm.
photo card designs. So I was sketching out layouts and different artistic elements that I wanted to create traditionally or pull back into either Photoshop or Procreate or Illustrator and refine. But on the right, you'll see like there's the tree and the squares along the bottom are to represent like the photos that I was thinking would be part of the card design. And so on this, you can kind of see on the left is my original artwork of the background in the tree. But then on the right, it's showing what I did to change it. So I filled in the white that's surrounding the tree. I lightened the color of the background. And I think I added the star on the top in Photoshop. And then this is the photo card design that I created.
Hmm.
And it didn't get approved, but I decided I really liked the art that I did. And I thought, oh, I think I'm going to turn this into an illustration portfolio piece. So this is what it ended up being in the end. So I added hand lettering. So you can see like along the bottom, that canvasy texture look and the snowflakes, those are all drawn in Procreate. And then I think
Hmm.
I did the lettering as well in Procreate, but then I ended up pulling it into Illustrator so that I can live trace it.
Yeah. And the final result is really different as well than the
Yeah,
previous one. And I think you can see like a lot more texture in this one as well. And I like that it's also not traditional Christmas colors. Like it feels brighter somehow.
yeah, I like that too. And sometimes I get bored very easily, so try to push the boundaries where you can.
Hmm.
So this is an example of a recent kind of an example of all the different techniques that I used, and I have it's like some other. I have some materials over here that I can actually show you.
Hmm.
So this is my initial sketch of him. I always tend to sketch really, really small. So
Yeah.
that's my initial sketch of him.
Hmm.
And then you can kind of see later on, I blew him up so that he'd be more the size.
That's
And then
great.
kind of just from there, did all of the elements separately. So there's like the sketches from that little like texture from the hat,
Hmm.
and then his nose line, his eye, and so I wanted to keep the certain qualities that you get from all of these. And here's the lettering. You can see from in the final piece though that it's I live traced it in Illustrator, so it's a
Yeah.
little more smooth. And then like my lines for like the axes and the wood and everything. It's like the
The
flannel
texture.
on his hat, and this is in colored pencil, and I just felt like it lended itself really perfectly to that soft felty look that you can get.
Yeah. It makes it feel like festive immediately. I love that. Yeah. That's great. And it's
These I
really,
think are watercolor pencils.
uh-huh.
So, like I did a lot of filtering effects in Photoshop for the trees to make them stand out. And this is like my personal favorite that I did that I want to kind of do more of is like I took a transparency sheet and I painted the beard and the rosy cheeks and the eyebrow hairs. And I think it kind of gives
So
it like a
fun.
different look, like almost like a three-dimensional kind of almost embossed look to it.
Hmm. Yeah.
And just like the paint of his hat, his face. So yeah, this piece I definitely did a lot of different like traditional techniques and pulled it together all in Photoshop and then added, brushes on top, like the stars and the dots, and I think the mushrooms,
Hmm.
and just did combined it all in as a Photoshop file at the end.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And then here, I actually took a collage workshop. And so I took this piece and I created a retweet pattern. So this is the original
Hmm. That looks
collage
really
piece.
nice as well.
Thank you. And then I wanted to add a little bit more depth to it. So I just actually took my original sketches of apples because I loved like the expressive. Again, I love like the original sketch a lot of
Yeah.
times, and I'm trying to integrate that more into
I
my
was
work.
also looking at the sketches behind you. Those are really nice as well. Like immediately it's really intriguing, the pies that you see in the row. It's
Thank
just
you.
so fun. Yeah, initial sketches, there's something about it.
Yeah, I love, and I always work small, so I end up having to like sketch it out. It's like super small, and then I'll like take a photo of it, and then I'll blow it up to the size it needs to be for that I want the final outcome to be, and then I'll go and refine it from there. But yeah, I like putting them up while I'm working, so I can kind of keep looking at it and gets me thinking about
Hmm.
it and working through it. So this piece, I actually is really different from a lot of the other pieces in my
Yeah.
portfolio, but I took leaves and that were falling. It was like around fall, and I'd heard about waxing leaves, and I'd never done it, so I did a project just for fun. And so here's some of the original wax leaves.
Oh yeah. Oh.
And I arranged them, and I just took and like the acorn and the pine cone, those are all found, and I just arranged it and took a photo of it.
Hmm.
And then I have my original sketch here of the lettering. Let's
Hmm.
see.
That's great.
And then I took that in and I used the live trace to make it smoother.
Yeah.
I think I also really like the way of working, combining traditional and digital medium is like the contrast from like the smooth, a lot of times that you can get with like live tracing and working with vectors
Yeah.
compared to like the texture you can get from, more traditional media. This one is collage, one of my collage pieces that I created for my portfolio. The little sun and the scratching is for the clouds, those are all, and like I think the texture I have that's in white in the background, that's all Procreate. And then like the leaves that are more flat, those are also in Procreate, but the petals of the flower and the lines along the bottom and the stem and the black and white leaves, those are collage elements that were all put together eventually in Photoshop. And then pretty much the same thing. Here's my original sketch. This one.
Oh yeah.
So it's kind of changed. Like I add a lot of texture for like with a brush and Procreate for like the middles of the flowers, like the peach like foliage behind it. That's all Procreate. But the vase and like the line on the bottom, that's collage, and then the lettering's done in Procreate.
Hmm.
So this one, similar to the other collage pieces, where the bird, the branches, and the pears, they're all collage work. Although some of the line work on top of the bird I did in Procreate on top, and then like all the foliage in the background and the lettering, that's all done in Procreate. And then everything ended up as a Photoshop file in the end.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. I really like the collage work on this. It's really fun. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, especially like this last example. I do like a lot of painting and like especially like for chalkboards and collage as well. I love that. And I'm also quite new to Procreate and just digital drawing in general. Like I've mostly used traditional. And then when I made the step to like digital, I didn't really know how to combine the two. So what kind of tips would you have for someone like me, for example, who wants to combine them more? Like what can I do with software?
I definitely think you just start with your sketch and just bringing it into Procreate, just taking a photograph of it or just scan and bringing it in, and that's what you can use to redraw on top of it if you want to refine it a little bit more,
Yeah.
or if you want to keep certain, like that's what I do a lot. I'll like with the line quality in one like part of it, and I'll erase everything else but keep that one part. So I would definitely recommend trying something like that.
Hmm.
So yeah, I would definitely start with like your traditional mediums first for the initial sketch. So take your initial sketch, and then you'll also learn this over time. Like, because a lot of times when I work, I'll make little notes as I'm working on my sketch. Like, I think this would look really good with like a painterly background. So I'll decide like acrylic or gouache or watercolor, or however I really kind of like the what I see wanting to look at the end. And so I'll make all my traditional medium at first and my sketch, and then that's what I
Hmm.
will bring into and digitize in my artwork. And then about experiment, you just from there you're experimenting with your digital tool and the effects. Because like even in Procreate, a lot of times what I bring into my sketch, sometimes I will take the sketch and I'll like do a multiply, because you can do like a lot of the similar effects that you can do in Photoshop, or like I won't quite like the color. And so I'll experiment with all like the color effects that you can do in Procreate. And I even do that in Photoshop as well, like in that lumberjack Santa Claus one. The trees, like I did a bunch of effects in Photoshop for that. So there's a lot of different things that you can experiment with just in bringing in your sketch, your traditional stuff that you make into your digital software.
And about that lumberjack Santa one, all the traditional techniques that you use, all of those are on separate layers, right? That makes it easier to scan them in and then change the colors and stuff of that later on and change the blending modes.
Yeah, that's why a lot of times, like I'm working, like I make the elements really like a lot of times I'll start with the initial sketch that looks like how I want it to look at the end. I'll work it out, and sometimes like I'll work it out even through series of like tracing paper. I'll have my sketch and they're like, this is too messy, or I want to add stuff, so like do a tracing of it, and like I'll kind of go from there and it builds up. But then sometimes like I'll pinpoint different areas I want like different looks for that I've identified. And so like with the lumberjack, like I had the lines for the hat. I did just like lines in pencil that I wanted to achieve that look. And so you bring them all the different elements in, and you scanning or photographing them into as separate layers. And that way it makes it a little bit easier when you're layering it in Photoshop or Procreate to do all those different effects without affecting the whole entire thing.
I see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I like, as a way to start, like that initial sketch, that's something that a lot of people I think forget about, including myself, of like that those pencil sketches are they're really valuable and people like seeing those. So that's a really good tip. What is something to just to end this conversation with, what is something that you want people to take away from using traditional media with digital, especially as illustrators and surface pattern designers?
I think just that it really opens up a whole new realm of working and experimenting and enhancing your work, really. Because there's just so many different possibilities, and that can be easy to overwhelm you. But if you use it as like almost a meditative, like relaxing way of winding down in your art, it could be also therapeutic for you as well. Because then it kind of takes the pressure off of, oh, I need a piece from a portfolio, or I need it for this client or whatever. If you're continually experimenting with your traditional stuff, you'll over time realize the ways that you can bring it into your professional work or like personal work projects that you have that you set out for yourself. And it's really just kind of opening more doors for you.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned Certex, where you were there this year, and you mentioned that people came up to you, right, and saw the traditional elements in your work and really connected to that as well. It seems that even though the world is turning into everything is digital, that people really connect to that traditional, just enjoy the tactile side of things as well.
It's really like bring the texture and quality to your work, absolutely. I think.
Yeah, I also love using textures, so I'm definitely going to keep that in mind and bring out those watercolor pencils as well, for sure. That's awesome.
Yeah, try the Aquarella wax pastels as well.
Exactly. Yeah, good one. I didn't even know those existed. Yeah, for sure. If you hadn't read this post yet, Cody wrote a really interesting blog post about combining traditional and digital media on my blog, on my website. And that's kind of what started this conversation. So if you haven't checked that out yet, the link is in the description as well. Thank you so much for talking about your creative process and sharing your work.
Thank you. It was so much fun.
Where can we find you?
My website, which is just my full name, codyalismore.com. And on Instagram, handle is codyalismore.
Okay, awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Cody.
Thank you.